question that you bring to it is, given that, why is it that people resist even looking into what happened on 9/11? The series of articles that you wrote, why do good people remain silent or worse about 9/11? Can you tell me about how you started those series of articles?
Yes, it's why do good people become silent or worse about 9/11? And that began when I first started looking into this issue of 9/11 truth and started organizing an educational group here in Colorado. And because I have a psychology background, I have been a psychotherapist. People in the movement say, "Fran, why don't you write something about this? Why is this so difficult for people?" And at the beginning, I said, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out myself. And finally, one person on the Architects and Engineers writing team emailed me and said, "Would you just write a few words, just write something, and then we'll pick it up and write an article about the psychology of 9/11, why this is so difficult for people to accept that it was not what the official story that we were told is not true." I started writing a few words, and I kept writing, and I could not stop writing. And suddenly everything was coming together for me. And so he said, "Wow, why don't you just write the article?" I said, "Okay." And so thinking I was going to write an article, and then I just kept writing and learning more, and people started giving me suggestions about things I should look into. And so it wound up becoming a very, very long serial essay that is being published on Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. And that's how it all started. And another point of this was really interesting, because I remember thinking in the early days, gosh, this is so difficult for people, this issue. And I really hope, and yet the evidence for 9/11, it being a deep event of some sort, of it not being what we were told, the evidence is so crystal clear. It's so easy to understand, even for the layperson. You do not have to be a scientist or an engineer to understand this evidence. I really hope someday the social psychologists, the psychology profession, will look into this, and it will be a great study for what happens to people when they run into evidence that contradicts their worldview. And I hope someone will do that study someday and maybe write a book on it. And then it seems that I'm winding up being that person. So that's really interesting how it all evolved like that.
We put the focus in many respects on the individual. Why do we resist? What's the matter with our psychology that we might resist this? But really the issue is would you say this is a bigger psyop designed to do exactly that?
Yes, I would say that it is a large psyop designed to do that. That is one thing I write about. I've written on many issues about the psychology of it, but it is a psychological operation. And, for example, it has been shown that people don't have a hard time acknowledging small lies, but it's a really huge lie that they cannot acknowledge. That goes beyond their belief that people could do something, that lie about something so huge. It boggles the mind to think that elements within our government who are supposed to be protecting U.S. citizens are not doing that, and in fact are purposefully killing and harming U.S. citizens in order for an excuse, a pretext to go to war. It just boggles people's minds. They can't get it. They don't want to believe it. They don't want to listen to it. As one person said to me, "I cannot listen to what you're saying, because if I listened to what you were saying, psychologically, I would go downhill."
The level, I don't know if you would use this word, I know David Ray Griffin does, of the demonic or the evil aspect of that is so much that takes advantage, in a sense, of our good nature.
That's right. For example, and I believe it was actually Hitler who said this, and this is one of the things I've written about. He said people, ordinary people will tell little lies themselves, but they won't tell a gigantic lie. They'd be too afraid of being caught. he was giving us an inroad to looking at our own psychology, that, yeah, we tell little lies all the time, little white lies, but we would never tell big lies. So we're basically good people. We would never think of harming anybody in this way. But, you know, there are people who don't have a conscience or have very little conscience who would harm people in this terribly evil way. It boggles our mind. It's like, as one person said to me, people just aren't that evil. And yet we're learning that people are that evil. We only have to look back to our history. One of the main examples being the Nazi era in Germany, to know that ordinary people, very ordinary people actually, not even psychopaths, but very ordinary people can be very evil, can do very evil things when they're ordered to.
You mentioned earlier about the woman who says just can't believe that can happen, that denial, and that creates in us cognitive dissonance. Can you talk about that?
Right. For example, most of us have a worldview that, for example, like what she said, people just aren't that evil. That's her worldview in that case. She's running into evidence now that shows that it really looks like, from all the evidence, from the evidence trail we have, that it was elements within our United States government, along with other intelligence agencies from outside of the U.S., that have actually orchestrated, the evidence really indicates this, have orchestrated something as shocking, as horrendous as 9/11, the 9/11 attacks. So that's where she has her worldview is being confronted. And so that brings up what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, which is basically an anxiety. It is a very great discomfort that their sense of home, their worldview, is crumbling. When they run into cognitive dissonance, this difficult time, this uncomfortableness, this anxiety, they will want to do two things. First of all, they want to deny this information. They want to avoid it, for one thing. If they hear it, they will want to deny that there could be anything to it. Or if they cannot deny that the evidence has validity, then they will try to minimize the evidence, or they could come up with a secondary cognition. I had two really interesting examples of that, which is there was an ardent Bush supporter that I knew. She said, she really loved George W. Bush, so she said she couldn't deny controlled demolition of the three buildings, World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7. And she said, okay, I can see that there's controlled demolition. I think what happened, she said very proudly to me, I think I understand it now. When in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, when Clinton was in office, when they started repairing the World Trade Center, they then laced those buildings with bombs, and therefore it's all Clinton's fault. You know, so she devised a secondary cognition to explain something that she could not deny, the evidence for controlled demolition of those three buildings. But then there was another friend I had who was an ardent Obama supporter who said she couldn't deny the evidence either. The evidence was crystal clear to her that there had to be controlled demolition, which of course implies that there had to be foreknowledge of this event and preparation. She said, I think Obama never could have known about this before 9/11 happened. He probably knows about it now, or before. He would not have known about this before he was president. But now that he's president, he probably knows. And he'd probably really like to tell us about it, but he can't, because if he did, everything would be in chaos in our country. The stock market would plummet, and therefore he cannot tell us about it. In other words, she was seeing him as a very benign leader who really wanted us to know the truth, and we know that that's not correct. So those are two examples of how people develop secondary cognitions in order to explain evidence that they could not explain, that would challenge their worldview too
And
much.
we have been living in a world where things like this go on and on. And we never want to take responsibility.
Exactly. And
So
that's
we can
exactly
let
what I
things
mean
like
by
this go on in
when I
our
say why do good
lives.
people become
Like she
silent?
said, in Nazi
Worse
Germany,
about
average
9/11,
people did some pretty
because
horrific
not only
things.
they may not become silent,
And
but
what
they
are
will
we
spend
going
big
to do?
money,
We are
amounts
right
of
on the
energy,
doorstep
finance,
of being in that
trying their
position.
best with
Are you ready to
intellectual
turn in, Grandma?
to prove that
You
we are
ready to
wrong,
tell
that
on your
this
best
could not
friend,
be
your
done
husband?
by
They're ready to live in
us
1984. The technology is already here.
I'm speaking with Fran Schur,
You know, my phone,
of the 9/11 consensus
you know,
panel. The book,
it's just a handful of you guys watching this.
An international
You know, I have no
panel
real
investigation.
following.
We're talking
I'm
about
living
a
on
series of
nothing.
articles
I'm living
on
out in the
why
woods
people
as a
become
homeless
silent or worse,
guy.
about 9/11.